أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. These verses in the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to certain actions that He made forbidden, and they were common amongst the people in the times of Jahiliyyah, in the times of paganism. And you may think that these verses in the Holy Quran are probably not fitting for such a night, specifically because they refer to alcohol and gambling. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them that alcohol and gambling are actions of the shaitan. So keep away from them, amongst others. And then He says, or He gives the motive of why the shaitan has any benefit in these things. He says the shaitan makes these things look good for you. His intention is to create enmity and hatred amongst you and to keep you away from the remembrance of Allah and the prayer. And then, as if in a question, He says, so will you then stop these things? When we look specifically at the message of Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi, and on this eve we come and commemorate the 40th of Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi. Now the visitation of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein is something that's recommended in the narrations every day of the year. Even if you do it from your own home, or if you have the ability to actually go there and visit Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi, it's recommended. On certain days, it's more recommended than others. For example, Laylatul Jum'ah, it's highly recommended. The night of the 15th of Sha'ban, the night of the 15th of Rajab, the nights of Layali al-Qadr in Shahr Ramadan, on the day of Arafah. So there's many more recommended visitations of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullahi alayh, and of them is the visitation on the Arbaeen. And the Arbaeen, we have a few narrations that speak about the visitation on this specific day. Of the narrations is of the most famous ones is the narration of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari when he talks about the signs of the believer, alamat al-mu'min, when he speaks about the signs of the believer, and of them is ziyarat al-Arbaeen. And of the other narrations we have is the actual dictated ziyarah on the time of Arbaeen. But ultimately, Imam al-Hussein salawatullahi alayh and the message of the Imam, which is Islam, is integrated into the whole faith. Everything we do on a daily basis is all to do with Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. And yet in Islam, the message is simple. The message is easy. It's not something difficult. It may be difficult to enact, but the message that's there is very simple. The Imam salawatullah alayh, in everything we do, we are reminded to remember him. So for example, if we drink water, إن شربتم عذب ماء فاذكروني, if you drink some water, then remember me, Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah, and the rewards are so on and so forth in the various narrations that if you drink, you'll be counted of the people that were with Imam al-Hussein. If you drink, you have paradise. If you drink, X amount of good deeds will be added to you and X amount of bad deeds will be eliminated from you. If you drink, when you drink the water, you remember Imam al-Hussein as many times as you drink throughout the day. And after you finish, you curse the killers of Imam al-Hussein again. When we pray, inshallah, all your prayers are accepted. And you can pray on any ground that you want. And yet if you pray on the soil that is from Karbala, the soil that is near the grave of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi, all of a sudden your prayers are accepted. All of a sudden your prayers fly through the 7 veils and go straight to the heavens if you pray with the turba of Imam Hussein salawatullah alayhi. So everything that we do has to do with this. The whole Quran is speaking about the concepts and the values of Islam, in which Imam al-Hussein gave such a high value that he gave everything that he could for these values. And so we see that the message of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi is within everything. Within our prayers, within what we drink, within what we eat, within what we breathe, within what we say. And the visitation of Imam al-Hussein is reminding us of that message, and that message is Islam. But specifically, a section of this message that is so important. The Imam basically wants you to not be an oppressor, and if it must be, then be the oppressed, and do not be an oppressor, or do not allow anyone else to be oppressed. And this is why the Imam says, and if you hear of a martyr or someone that has been killed, then remember me. Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, when he talks to Rayyan ibn Shabib, he says to him, if you are crying and kunta bakiyan, if you're going to cry, then cry over Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi. That this crying is rewarded, that this crying is beneficial, that this crying will remind you of that greatest oppression. And it will make you hate oppression, and it will make you stand away from oppression. And this is what is so important. So what is the relation between this message of Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi and eliminating ourselves or removing ourselves from oppression or wanting to be oppressors and making the right decisions, and al-khamr and al-maysir? When we look at these two concepts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about in the Holy Quran, khamr is wine, maysir is gambling. That we look at these two things and we see that one is alcohol and one is gambling. Where is the relation? The relation is khamr by definition is anything ma yukhammar al-aql, that anything that makes your aql lazy, anything that makes your aql mushy. And this is the whole concept of alcohol. Alcohol, we have another hadith that says that everything that makes you drunk, kull muskar fahuwa khamr, that everything that makes you drunk is actually khamr, or called or labeled as khamr. So what are these things that make your aql lazy? What are these things that make your aql into mush? That make your aql into something soft and you don't have this perception? We have alcohol, we have drugs. These are the mainstream things that we know. And these things are there for a purpose, to cause sedation amongst the people. Because people can't live their lives when they see the reality of life and everything around it without having something to sedate them and to keep them calm. Something to make their minds go to sleep, enter a state of ghafla, and no longer visualize and see the reality of this life. And when they have this is how they can accept going, living, working on a day-to-day basis, doing whatever it is that they do, while around them is just a whirlwind of oppression, of people that are like me and you. This is the only way you can do it. How else can you walk through it? Unless you're not completely sedated or your mind is not drunk. The drunkenness of the mind doesn't stop at khamr by definition. So khamr from a fiqhi perspective is something else, obviously. But khamr, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about in the Holy Quran, and what the shaitan aims to do by it, is to create enmity and hatred amongst the people. And if you find, this is exactly what it does. Addiction in general. Addiction in general makes the mind dull. It dullens the mind. If you, whatever it is that you are addicted to, whether it's entertainment being the cheapest it's ever been in the history of mankind, whether it's gaming, computer games, that if everything is, all you're thinking about is being on that system and being online and playing, your brain is turning to mush. Or when we train our children, for example, from a young age, just give them YouTube and then just let them go. That's it. You let them go on YouTube and that's it. They're gone the whole day. Beautiful. Free childcare. You only pay for it once, connect it to the Wi-Fi, and that's it. You've got this childcare running for the whole day. And they just sit down and they watch, and you don't know what they're watching. And it doesn't really matter what they're watching. The hadith of the Imam Al-Mujtaba alayhi salam, Imam Hasan al-Mujtaba, when he says, "Ajibtu لمن يتفكر في مأكوله كيف لا يتفكر في معقوله. He says that I am amazed by one who worries about what he eats, but he doesn't worry about what enters his mind or what he thinks about. That he stops himself from eating things that harm his stomach, and yet he takes on whatever destroys his aql and his chest. It destroys his nafs, and he takes it all on. He just views it and watch it. Oh my God, look, there's a video of a guy getting hit by a car. Let's watch it. Oh, guy jumping off a building. Let's watch it. This guy got hung. Let's watch it. What are you watching? Someone sends me this clip or this, whatever it is, and you have to. Let's clickbait, you watch it, you look at it. What do you think this is doing to yourself? What do you think it's doing, for example, to your children and to your folk? Is this not, or does this not fall, not in a jurisprudential perspective, but does this not fall under that banner of khamr, of something that destroys your aql, of something that reduces your aql and makes it softer and sedates your aql, and you no longer have the ability to see? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that these things are there for that purpose, that they create enmity and they create hatred. This enmity and hatred is created via indifference and ignorance, that we no longer feel any empathy towards others and we become ignorant of others. How hard do our hearts become when we see this? When you say, look at this picture, look what happened to these children in I don't know what country. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen worse than that. You know what I've seen? Let me show you. And they show you what they've seen that's even worse than what they are showing. Is that not the state? Or is that not the state that we are in? Is this not what is correct? And so the Imam salawatullah alayhi gives this fantastic example where people worry about what it is they eat. And I'm not just talking from a health perspective. I'm talking generally. You know, people say, I don't eat tomatoes. Another guy says, I don't eat capsicum. Another person says, I don't eat the fat, or I don't eat this, or I don't eat sausages, or whatever it is that they don't eat, and whatever, or this hurts my stomach. And they're very careful. Why? Because they don't want to feel that pain, and they don't want to fall under that pain. And this is the biggest problem, the sedation of the mind, the sedation of the aql. And if you look at Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi, and the message of Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi, and if you look at the time that he was in, really, the people that were there were not worth dying for. The ummah, that sort of ummah, was not worth dying for. It was something bigger than this. Obviously, this was a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it was something for the future generations as we have today. But that ummah that existed at the time, subhanallah, their minds were so, and I mentioned this a few nights ago, their minds were fully asleep. That they had no cognition at all. They were like zombies. That imagine it's the same people. Realistically, it's the same people that wrote the letters to Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi, gave bay'ah to Muslim, and a few weeks later or a few days later were on the land of Karbala. They were the people who formed the army, the people of Kufa that were there. These same people. The likes of Umar ibn Sa'd, when he has the discussion with Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayhi, many discussions, and if you see how Ibn Sa'd begins to rationalize every action that he wants to do. So the Imam tells him, don't do this. He says, I'm afraid. What are you afraid for? I'm afraid for my land. I'll lose my land. The Imam says, I'll give you land. I'll lose my wealth. I'll give you wealth. This is different conversations that they have. And some of them where the Imam tells him, whatever it is that you are afraid of, I will give you. Turn back from this. And then he imagines the command of Rai. That subhanAllah, look where his mind is. His mind is living in a fantasy that will never happen. And this is where we look at al-maysar. When we look at gambling, this is what gambling is. And gambling, again, it doesn't just come down to you betting your money. It's the creation of that fantasy. That you have this fantasy of something that's going to happen. It's actually, in actuality, it's tult al-amal. That you have great hope in this dunya. And this is exactly what Ibn Sa'd had. He had this hope in the dunya, and with the poem that he says that if they say that there's paradise and there's the fire of hell, and then if this is true, Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Then if this is true, then in 2 years' time, I'll do tawbah. I'll ask God for forgiveness, and then I'll go to this paradise that they speak about, and I'll escape the fire of hell. Is this not gambling in its essence? That you place all of your eggs on this fading hope? This is what gambling is. This is what the lottery ticket is. Playing those same numbers every week, those same numbers every week. Or some people, he says, my marja says it's haram, but my friend buys the ticket for me and he does the numbers. But you're killing yourself with that false hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't waiting for your numbers to make you wealthy if wealth is good for you. Inshallah, Allah will make you wealthy if wealth is good for you. But what they do is they lay on this false hope. This is Umar ibn Sa'd. Has this false hope, exactly like gambling. This fantasy of something that will never eventuate and never take place. And based on this fantasy, he is willing to kill and to oppress and to murder just to achieve a fantasy goal that he never achieves. SubhanAllah, he never achieves. In a hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayh, a man comes, he travels a long distance and he asks him, he says to him, he asks him, he says, I want to ask you 4 questions. The Imam tells him, ask me 40. And of them, he says to him, ما هو الصعب وما هو الأصعب. And so the Imam says to him, الصعب, the difficult, is al-ma'asiyah, is committing the disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, وَالْأَصْعَبْ فَوْتَ الْأَجْرِ. أَجْرَ الْمَعْصِيَةِ فَوْتَ أَجْرَ الْمَعْصِيَةِ. That you don't get the what? The reward of that ma'asiyah. That when you go to commit sin, you're committing sin to achieve something and you don't achieve that. You don't get the achievement of it. And if you look at it, everyone that commits these sorts of actions, they never get the gain from what they want. They don't get the gain. They commit the sin, but they never get that gain. Umar ibn Sa'd, case in point, and all of the people that were killers of Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayh, you see that they were never able to achieve what it is that they set out to ask for. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala points out that these 2 things, in the forms that they come, with the shaitan's motivation to create enmity and hatred between you, are the things that turn you towards becoming robotic and no longer seeing the reality of this world. There's an interesting anecdote or story of a man who was the king of a town. And in this city, he was king. Every time he would commit a sin, the mu'mineen would come and say to him, this is a sin, you can't do this is haram, Allah has... And so he got angered by them. He said, yeah, I'm sick of these people coming and telling me what to do. So he made an edict and said, I want all of the believers out of this town. So they kicked all of the believers out of the town. There was none left except his main advisor was a believer, but he was using taqiyya. So he had not told the king that he was a believer. But throughout his life, he tried every time to just sort of, I want to show this person, I want to show him the truth about belief. And he would try, and every time he got too scared. If he says something, he's scared that he might get exiled, or because he was an advisor, he might actually get killed. So he kicked the believers out. One day they're on a hunting trip. As they're hunting, they hear music coming from a certain area. So the king says, stop, I can hear something. And he says, yes, what is it? He says, I hear music. He said, good, let's follow the music. So they follow the music into the forest and they find a cave. And within this cave, they find this man, and with him he has this old woman, who's like an old hag. She's got no teeth, her hair's everywhere. This man probably hasn't had a shower in months, and the smell turned them off. But as they entered, they noticed that this man was sitting there playing some musical instrument in the cave. The lady was dancing for him, and they were both getting drunk, and they were laughing, happy. And so the king looked at his advisor and he said, do you see these people? He says, yes. He says, look at them. He goes, and they're happy. How can they be happy? He says, look how disgusting they are. Look how dirty and filthy they are and what they're doing. He says, this is weird. So the advisor says to him, he says, this is my opportunity to say something. He says to him, you know what, king? There are people that look at us in this way. And the king says, what, me? Look at me, someone who is clean, and he thinks he wears his nice robes and everything, but he doesn't look at the haram that he's doing. He says, yes. He says, and who are these people? He says, the believers. Why? Because the believers see the dunya for what it actually is. And they look at it in very simple terms. It's not complex. You have a look at the companion of Imam al-Hussein, Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, and a very simple calculation. And if you read about this man, truly this is a man of great fortune and aql. Because he was somebody that ultimately he stopped the Imam al-Hussein from moving on, and he made sure he stayed in that position until the army of Umar ibn Sa'd from the Kufa came. But then he brought it back down to one calculation. He says, أُخَيِّرُ نَفْسِي بَيْنَ الْجَنَّةِ وَالنَّارِ. That he said, I see myself between two choices, paradise and the fire of hell. And he says, and I will not choose anything over paradise. Oh Allah, simple. Very simple deduction, but a difficult action. But through this, he had that clarity in that time. How do you expect for us to have clarity? Just like the people of Kufa, who didn't have that clarity, even though the Imam was in front of their eyes. It was from this. It was from the excesses through alcohol. It was from the excesses through false hope in this world. That the majority of them, like we said, the majority of the people who fought against Imam al-Hussein sallallahu alayhi weren't getting paid. It wasn't money they were doing it for. The majority of the people who formed the army of Umar ibn Sa'd were there just to stand with Ibn Ziyad and say, we're with you. Ma'akum la ma' ghayrikum. This is it. That's what they were saying to Ibn Ziyad and to Umar ibn Sa'd. It's enough. Just let us come with you. We'll attack Hussein, but as long as, salawatullahi alayh, just as long as that you know that we are on your side. What causes this? This is what causes this. Nabi Isa alayhi salam, it's narrated of one of the Imams, Imam al-Sadiq, I believe, that Nabi Isa alayhi salam, he says to them, by truth I say to you. He says, إنه كما ينظر المريض إلى طيب الطعام فلا يلتذ مع ما يجد منه. He says that just like the sick person looks at delicious food and he can't find it delicious. Why? From the amount of pain that he has from his illness. When somebody is ill, sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He says, فَلَا يَلْتَذْ مَعْ مَا يَجِدْ مِنْ شِدَّةِ الْأَلَمِ أو شِدَّةِ الْوَجَعِ. He says that he doesn't find the food, just like a sick person looks at delicious food and he doesn't find it delicious, nor can he eat it. Why? Because of the pain that he's in. He says, in the same way, he says, كَذَلِكَ صَاحِبُ الدُّنْيَا لَا يَلْتَذْ بِالْعِبَادَةِ. In the same way, a person that is drowning in this world, or of this world, or a companion of this dunya, cannot feel the delight in worship. He doesn't find worship as something that's appealing. And then he says, in the same way that the person that is healthy sees the sweetness in the food or the tastiness in the food, the one who has seen the sweetness, the one who is drowning in the wealth of this dunya cannot see the sweetness of worship. That he can't see that sweetness. Why? Because he's drowning in that. This dunya, what does it represent? It's money, it's power, it's everything that we see in this dunya, but mostly, the biggest thing it represents is the false hope that we attain to it, that we attach to it. We attach this false hope to this world, and that's the false hope that keeps you away. Why? Because you think that you're going to be here forever, and you think that you'll be able to attain all of these things. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that verse in the Holy Quran uses these two specific examples. And he uses a simple word like khamr. And today the jurists are up in arms about exactly what khamr is, for example. And they study it and they try and get into the details of exactly what it is. And why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use such a specific example? For the evils of alcohol? Certainly, most certainly. But he shows the motive of Iblis being al-adawat wal-baghdha, enmity and hatred amongst you. And this is what it is. Anything that turns your mind, that turns your aql, that blunts your aql, this is what allows the authorities, for example, whoever's in power, to create this hatred and enmity amongst you. And Basically, the message of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, salawatullahi alayh, is to bring you that message, to have empathy and to not oppress. And if you fall under what condition, you either have to oppress or be oppressed, then be oppressed. And this is why the Imam, on the day of Ashura, he says, Al-Maut awla min ruqub al-ar. He says that death is better than committing what? Something that's dishonorable. Death is better than committing something that's dishonorable. Ar is shame, something that's shameful. So he says death is better than this. And then he says, but rather, he says, wal-ar awla min dukhul al-nar. That something that is dishonorable is better than going into the fire of hell. The meaning behind this, perhaps, is that death is better than doing something that's dishonorable. Dishonorable is something that's dishonorable in the eyes of the people, not the eyes of the believers. Dishonorable in the eyes of the believers is lying, for example. If you lie in the ahadith, this is counted as a big ar. Sometimes ibadah is counted as a ar. See in the hadith of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam about the Zuwar of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, he uses that exact term. He says that there are people that make it look like a shame to go and visit Imam al-Hussein. And in other hadith, there's more in greater detail that the person that visits Imam al-Hussein, they compare him to a licentious woman. That what are you going to do to go and visit this, or you're going to hurt yourself or harm yourself? So the things that they see, or acts of worship, for example, forget the hadith, that they see great shame in the acts of worship, that they see great shame in acts of worship, that the believers see as easy. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, he says that the believers, the acts of worship that they see as easy. For example, visiting Imam al-Hussein, we take pleasure in visiting Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayh. The people of this world see it as something difficult. You're going to Iraq, foreign country, full of war, so on and so forth. And if you're going to go, just go by car at least. You don't have to walk. Why are you walking? You're wasting your time. There's a million things you could do instead of walking. Why don't you go read a book? Why don't you go whatever? That they make it look like it's a bad action. And this is what the Imam means by this. Perhaps that death is better than what they see is dishonorable, or as we see in general, if somebody loses in a battle, this is seen as dishonorable. And when he knows that he's going to be killed and his women folk will be taken prisoner, the Imam salawatullah alayh knows that in the eyes of the people they see this as something that's dishonorable. So the Imam says death is better than dishonor. But what you see as dishonorable, if I have to choose between that and the fire of hell, then I'll go into what you see as dishonorable, like visiting Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullah alayh, etc. On this eve, we commemorate again the 40th of Imam al-Hussein salawatullah alayh, and generally on the 40th we do majalis for anyone that's deceased. Usually when someone dies, we have a majlis on the day that they die, we have one on the asbur, the 7th day, and the 40th day, and the yearly. The reason behind this is that we have a belief, according to ahadith generally, that on these days, the soul returns to the home. Or the soul comes back to visit its family and say, what has my family done for me? And this is why we do this generally. With the Al-Arbaeen, this is what's generally known for Al-Arbaeen, but the Al-Arbaeen of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullah alayh, there's many other reasons other than the narrations that we spoke about. Inshallah, tomorrow we can speak a little bit about those. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of our holy Imam Ajla Faraj al-Sharif. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the ziyarah of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein salawatullah alayh, to cure our sick, to have mercy on our dead, to fulfill our debts inshaAllah, and to accept our deeds. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة وأهدى ثوابها إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. تسبقها الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.